in a quiet corner of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. A small misunderstanding sparks a chain of events that no one could have predicted. A seasoned white pilot, a curious black teen, and a frantic police call. The tension crackles like lightning before a summer storm. When the teen's mother arrives, the world tilts on its axis because she isn't just anyone, she's the new owner of the airline itself. In this story of prejudice, power, and redemption, hard truths come to light, shocking alliances are formed, and the consequences shake the industry to its core. Brace yourself for an unforgettable journey. It was a bright Monday morning at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. In Terminal A, travelers bustled about, their wheeled suitcases creating a continuous hum on the polished floors. Families jostled in line for security checks, while business people tapped away at laptops. Among the crowd was 17-year-old Andre Westbrook, there on an errand for his mother. Tall for his age, and with an unending curiosity shining in his brown eyes, Andre had arrived early, hoping to explore the airport. He was tasked with collecting a last-minute envelope from the airline's administrative office, a seemingly simple job. Yet Andre couldn't help lingering in the long corridor connecting two concourses, watching airplanes through the massive windows. He had always found them enchanting, silver birds, carrying people to distant lands and new adventures. While other teenagers his age might have been enthralled with music videos or social media, Andre loved reading about aeronautical engineering, cockpit instruments, and flight procedures. This was, in part, because flying was in his blood, although most people didn't realize just how literally that was true. Today, dressed in a casual hoodie, jeans, and stylish sneakers, he probably looked like any other teen waiting for his flight. The glimmer in his eyes suggested he was imagining the intricate workings of the jets out on the tarmac. Passengers occasionally gave him polite nods, sensing his enthusiasm. They probably believed he was just another young traveler daydreaming about far-off places. Then, from the corner of his eye, Andre noticed a uniformed pilot briskly walking in his direction. The man's short, cropped blonde hair was peppered with grey at the temples, and his crisp white shirt bore the insignia of a senior pilot for the airline. His ID badge read, Captain Jonathan Myers. As Captain Myers strode past, he gave Andre a fleeting glance. There was nothing particularly noteworthy about that look, just the brief, impersonal flicker of a stranger passing by. Or so Andre thought. Unbeknownst to Andre, Captain Myers had caught the teen's silhouette in the reflection of the glass. He noticed that Andre seemed to be standing in one spot for a long time, scrutinizing the planes and occasionally glancing at the employees who went in and out of a secured door that led to the flight crew lounge. It was enough to spark a certain wariness in Myers, who was highly protective of cockpit security. The airline had recently circulated memos about vigilance, urging employees to report suspicious behavior. As the pilot disappeared around a corner, Andre remained immersed in his fascination for the taxiing planes, unaware that he had just attracted the notice of someone both powerful and determined to act on even the smallest hint of trouble. The airline Andre's mother worked for Southern Skies Aviation had just gone through an acquisition. Rumors whispered through the hallways like a secret wind. The new owner was someone formidable. Employees knew only that the buyout contract had been signed, but the identity of the new owner was tightly guarded for reasons involving non-disclosure agreements, stock fluctuations, and corporate politics. This had sparked tension among the workforce. Change was in the air, and not everyone was comfortable with it. Among those most on edge was Captain Jonathan Myers. A veteran pilot with over 25 years in the cockpit, Myers had grown used to the old ways. He prided himself on his track record of safe landings, superb performance evaluations, and a perfect attendance record. Southern Skies Aviation had been his home for so long that he couldn't imagine it shifting in a way that might threaten his position. Walking briskly down the corridor, he recalled the last staff meeting. Management had emphasized security. They had circulated examples of how, in the age of advanced technology, corporate espionage or security breaches could come from anywhere. The company wanted employees to keep an eye out for anything unusual. In Myers' mind, that included a lone teenager standing for too long outside restricted access points, glancing at flight crew entrances. He paused near a large window overlooking the runway, letting the steady rhythm of ascending jets calm his nerves. Something about the teen had pricked at his instincts. It wasn't necessarily that the kid was Black. Myers would have insisted to anyone that he was not prejudiced in the slightest. However, deep in the recesses of his mind, he carried assumptions and stereotypes he barely recognized in himself. The decades he had spent primarily in social circles that looked exactly like him had shaped an unconscious bias. While he told himself he would have been suspicious of any teen standing there so intently, the truth was more complex. After a moment of deliberation, Myers pulled out his phone and dialed the airport security desk. The line rang twice before a curt voice answered. "Airport security, Sergeant Willis speaking." "Hello, Sergeant Willis. This is Captain Jonathan Myers of Southern Skies Aviation. I am on Concourse A, near Gate A15. There's a young man who's been loitering around a secure flight crew door for quite some time. He seems to be studying who goes in and out like he's casing the area. I'd like you to send someone to check it out." On the other end, Sergeant Willis sounded weary, like he'd heard similar calls 1,000 times. "Can you describe him?" "Tall, black teenager, maybe around 17, wearing a grey hoodie and jeans. He's got his eyes glued to the planes and the staff entrances." "All right, we'll send someone." Myers hung up. A flicker of satisfaction crossed his face, followed by a hint of guilt he was unwilling to acknowledge. He told himself he was just doing his job, fulfilling the airline's request to watch out for suspicious behavior. But deep down, a part of him sensed that this call would set in motion forces he might not be able to control. Oblivious to the phone call Captain Myers had just made, Andre finally tore himself away from the window. The planes, especially the state-of-the-art Airbus A350 parked at the adjacent gate, had mesmerized him. He mentally catalogued the details he'd read about that particular model, the advanced wing design, the fuel efficiency, and the next-generation flight deck. He even wondered which pilot was about to fly that aircraft, never imagining for a second that it might be Myers himself. He glanced at his phone. The text from his mother simply read, "Pick up envelope from Miss Jenkins in admin. Don't be late. Love you. Miss you." Jenkins was her longtime assistant, and Andre figured she'd be waiting in the executive lounge or the administrative suite behind it. He straightened his hoodie and made his way toward the corridor leading to the offices. The hallway that led to the admin area felt oddly imposing. The polished floors gleamed under fluorescent lights, and the walls featured framed photos of the airline's history. One showcased the first aircraft Southern Skies Aviation had ever flown, an old DC-3. Another displayed triumphant employees celebrating the airline's 25th anniversary. Andre paused here and there, reading captions and absorbing bits of history. One photograph in particular caught his eye. A large group photo of the airline's major shareholders at a recent summit. The faces were mostly older, mostly white, and exuded a certain corporate confidence. Andre squinted at the plaque beneath it, Board of Directors, 2019. He recognized none of them personally, but something in the text made him chuckle. "We might own the skies, but it's our employees who hold us up." It sounded like a PR line, and for all he knew, that was exactly what it was. Yet it rang with a sort of ironic truth. He whispered to himself, "You'll see what real ownership looks like very soon." He recalled the day his mother first spoke about acquiring Southern Skies. It had been an out-of-the-blue revelation at their dining room table, the kind that made Andre drop his spoon into his cereal bowl, splashing milk everywhere. She'd explained how she had formed a consortium and outbid several major players. The negotiations had been intense and largely confidential. Andre was sworn to silence because they didn't want early leaks that might affect stock prices or the transition process. He couldn't tell even his best friends that his mother, a brilliant entrepreneur who had built successful ventures in tech and hospitality, was about to become a formidable force in the airline industry. Savoring the memory of his mother's victorious smile, Andre strolled deeper into the corridor. He didn't notice the airport security officer who had started to follow him at a distance, nor did he realize that Captain Myers had set a complex game in motion, a game in which Andre was now an unsuspecting piece. Two uniformed airport security officers approached Andre just as he neared the administrative offices. One was Sergeant Willis, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a receding hairline. The other was a younger officer named Parker, newly assigned to airport duty and exuding an air of nervous diligence. "Excuse me, son," Sergeant Willis said, his tone polite but firm. "We'd like to ask you a few questions." Andre blinked, momentarily thrown off. Sure," he replied. A tinge of unease fluttered in his gut. Why were they stopping him? He racked his brain to see if he had wandered somewhere restricted, but the corridor, while not heavily trafficked, was still accessible to any passenger en route to the offices or lounges. "May I see your ID and your boarding pass?" Willis asked. "I don't have a boarding pass," Andre explained, keeping his voice steady. "I'm not flying today. I'm here to pick up something from my mother's assistant." The officers exchanged a glance. Parker stepped forward. "We received a report that you were loitering by the flight crew entrance, watching employees come and go. Could you tell us why you were doing that?" Andre felt a rush of confusion mingled with a flicker of anger. "I wasn't loitering, I was just looking at the planes. I'm into aviation, I find it fascinating." Willis studied him carefully. His gaze was not hostile, but it held the practiced skepticism of someone who'd encountered hundreds of suspicious individuals, some of them indeed guilty of wrongdoing. "Can you provide any proof about why you're here?" Andre pulled out his phone, heart hammering. He was keenly aware of how quickly situations like these could escalate for someone who looked like him. He found his mother's text, showing the instructions to pick up the envelope from Miss Jenkins. "It's right here," he said, handing the phone over. Willis glanced at the text, then back at Andre's face. "Your mother works for the airline?" he asked, brow furrowed. Andre swallowed. Something like that. He didn't want to give away the big secret that she was, in fact, the new owner. It wasn't his place to reveal that. "Not yet," he thought. Willis nodded slowly, returning the phone. "Look, you need to understand, we have strict security protocols here. If you appear to be surveying secure areas, we have to check it out." Andre took his phone back, pressing his lips into a tight line. "I understand," he said. "But you could have just asked me politely, without implying I'm doing something wrong." Behind them, a small group of passers-by started to gawk. Among them was a flight attendant who recognized Andre, having seen him in VIP areas before, but she hesitated to intervene. The tension in the air felt palpable. Willis cleared his throat. "If everything checks out, you can be on your way. Let me make a quick call." While Willis stepped aside to confirm Andre's story, Parker remained, standing somewhat awkwardly. Andre noticed the younger officer's uneasy expression, as though he wasn't entirely comfortable with the situation. Moments later, Willis returned. He gave Andre a slight nod. "All right, your story checks out. Next time, try not to linger around restricted areas. Have a good day." Feeling both relief and frustration, Andre thanked them curtly before slipping through the door to the administrative offices. He had no idea that another call to the local police would soon be placed by a more zealous Captain Myers. Nor did he suspect that the next encounter would be far more explosive. Captain Jonathan Myers stood in the crew lounge, fiddling with a disposable cup of coffee. He was scheduled to pilot the afternoon flight to Seattle, one of Southern Skies Aviation's busiest routes. Despite the flight being hours away, he felt antsy, unable to shake his growing suspicion about the teenager he had reported. He had overheard a snippet of a conversation from a steward passing by. Security talked to some kid. Turned out to be nothing. That snippet echoed in Myers' mind like a challenge to his judgment. Turned out to be nothing. Could it really be so innocent? He remembered the seriousness of the security bulletins. They had hammered home the message, better to over-report than under-report. He told himself that he was acting out of due diligence. If there was even a remote chance that the teen was up to something malicious, be it industrial espionage, sabotage, or something worse, could Myers live with himself if he turned a blind eye? He pulled out his phone, hesitating for a moment. Calling local police was a step further than just notifying airport security. It could lead to real consequences, like the teen being detained, questioned more aggressively, or placed on some watch list. Yet Myers' pride and paranoia spurred him on. He opened the phone's contact list, located the direct line for the local precinct that he had once used when a passenger became violent, and pressed call. A brisk voice answered, "Atlanta Police Department, Officer Kingsley. Officer Kingsley, this is Captain Jonathan Myers from Southern Skies Aviation. I called airport security about a suspicious individual earlier. They might have brushed it off, but I believe we need a deeper look." The teen was loitering, possibly gathering intel on our security protocols. There was a pause. "Sir, if airport security has cleared the individual, are you sure the situation warrants escalation?" Myers lowered his voice, adopting a confidential tone. "Look, I've been with this airline for 25 years. I know suspicious behavior when I see it. The management has urged us to be vigilant. I'm telling you, something about that kid's demeanor felt off. He was too interested in the flight crew door. We can't risk a breach." Officer Kingsley sounded skeptical but took down the details. "All right, Captain. We'll send a unit. We'll coordinate with airport security to locate the individual and verify his identity." Hanging up, Myers felt a knot in his stomach. He tried to reassure himself he had done the right thing. In a world of constant threats, it was always better to be safe than sorry. Yet a sliver of doubt gnawed at him. Am I overreacting? But he batted it away, burying his uncertainty under layers of self-justification. "I'm just doing my job," he muttered, downing the last of the lukewarm coffee and tossing the cup into a trash bin. Little did he know, this call would spark a much larger confrontation, one that would involve not just Andre, but also his mother, Miss Jenkins, and other key figures at Southern Skies Aviation. Before the day was over, the repercussions of Myers' decision would extend far beyond a routine check, shaking the foundation of his career and the airline's future. Andre exhaled a breath of relief once inside the administrative suite. The corridor gave way to plush carpeting and glass-fronted offices. Unlike the bustling terminals, this area was quiet, the air punctuated only by the faint hum of photocopiers and muffled voices on conference calls. He headed to the front desk, manned by a middle-aged receptionist who wore a polite but distant smile. "I am here to see Miss Jenkins," Andre said, keeping his voice calm despite the churn in his stomach from the recent run-in with security. The receptionist nodded and pointed toward a frosted glass door on the left. "She's in office 304. You can go right in." Andre made his way down a short hallway, the thick carpet muffling his footsteps, and gently knocked on the door. A warm, familiar voice called, "Come in." He stepped inside to find Miss Jenkins, Lena Jenkins, his mother's loyal and efficient assistant for nearly a decade. She was impeccably dressed in a navy blue pantsuit, her hair styled in neat waves, and she greeted Andre with a broad smile. "Andre, sweetie," she extended her arms for a quick hug. "I'm so glad you're here." "Me too," Andre replied, feeling some of his tension ease. Miss Jenkins had always been something of an aunt figure to him. "Mum told me to pick up an envelope from you, Miss." Jenkins nodded, turning to a sleek desk and retrieving a sealed manila envelope. "Yes, these are some final documents for her to sign later today. I was going to send a courier, but she insisted you might want to get a feel for the place now that." She trailed off, remembering that Andre wasn't supposed to be discussing the takeover openly. "Well, you know." He nodded knowingly. "I got stopped by security on my way here," he confessed, lowering his voice. Her eyes widened. "Seriously? Why?" "They said I was loitering near a secured door. They let me go, but it was definitely unnerving." A shadow crossed Miss Jenkins' face. "We need to address that. Once everything goes public, these misunderstandings could take on an entirely different tone. And we don't want your mother's first few days as the new owner marred by an avoidable conflict." She handed him the envelope. "Let's get you out of here smoothly. We have an exit that leads directly to a side parking lot. It might be better if we avoid the main terminal, just in case." Andre took the envelope, grateful for her concern. The plan was simple. Miss Jenkins would walk him to the staff elevator, which opened into a smaller lobby near a private parking lot. From there, Andre could easily catch a ride or even an Uber if needed. Problem solved, or so they thought. Neither could predict that Captain Myers' call to the local police had set another layer of scrutiny in motion. A pair of Atlanta PD officers were already coordinating with airport security, determined to locate the suspicious teen. By the time Andre and Miss Jenkins reached the private lobby, they would find themselves confronting a reality far harsher than a simple misunderstanding. While Andre and Miss Jenkins descended in the quiet staff elevator, two Atlanta PD officers, Officer Kingsley and Officer Gomez, were receiving instructions from Sergeant Willis in the main security office. Kingsley, a seasoned cop, listened intently to Willis's explanation of events. Gomez, on her first month in the district, took notes on a small notepad. "So, the kid's name is Andre," Willis said, crossing his arms. "He was picking up documents for some admin staff. Security here cleared him, but Captain Myers, the pilot who reported him, seemed insistent that we escalate." Kingsley raised a skeptical eyebrow. "But the kid's story checked out?" Willis nodded. "Yes, he showed me a text message from his mother, instructing him to pick up an envelope from Miss Jenkins. We verified Miss Jenkins is an employee in the executive offices. Everything seemed legit." "Why involve us then?" Gomez asked, looking genuinely puzzled. Willis shrugged. "You know how it is sometimes. People get paranoid, or maybe the captain has some personal issue. I don't know. All I know is a request was made and forwarded to the police. Legally, we have to follow through." Kingsley gave a resigned sigh. "All right, let's do a quick check. If the kid's already left or is no threat, we'll be on our way." The officers stepped out of the security office and headed toward the administrative wing. Along the way, they passed a flustered Captain Myers, who caught sight of their uniforms and immediately approached them. "Officers," he said, a note of urgency in his voice, "thank you for coming. That teenager is definitely suspicious. I'm telling you, he was scoping out the crew entrances." Kingsley gave him a measured look. "The security staff says he's just a kid running an errand." Myers stiffened. "We can't be too careful, especially these days." An awkward silence stretched. Then Gomez tried to diffuse it. "We understand, sir. We'll do our due diligence." They continued on, but Myers trailed behind, as if unwilling to leave the matter to chance. Eventually, they reached the administrative corridor, scanning the office doors. Just as they were about to ask a passing employee for directions, they spotted Miss Jenkins and Andre stepping out of the staff elevator lobby. "That's them," Myers said, pointing. Kingsley nodded. Okay, let us handle this. The two officers approached quickly, their expressions professional. Miss Jenkins and Andre turned at the sound of approaching footsteps. Miss Jenkins recognized the police uniforms, and her eyes flickered with immediate concern. Andre's stomach twisted as memories of his earlier brush with security floated back. Officer Kingsley spoke first. Andre Westbrook. Andre nodded. Yes, sir. We'd like to speak with you regarding a report we received, Kingsley said. He kept his tone calm, but the formality was unmistakable. Miss Jenkins stepped in front of Andre protectively. Is there a problem? He's my colleague's son. He's here to pick up documents. She lifted the envelope, as if its very existence were proof of innocence. Gomez tried to appear reassuring. We understand that, Ma'am, but we received a report that this young man might be involved in suspicious activity. We just need to clear everything up. Captain Myers hovered in the background, watching intently. Andre felt his pulse thundering in his ears. If the security check before had been unnerving, this was outright intimidating. Surrounded by uniformed officers, pinned under the suspicious gaze of a pilot who seemed determined to find wrongdoing, Andre wondered how quickly things could spiral out of control. Little did he know, they were only moments away from the dramatic reveal that would flip the power dynamics completely. Suspicious activity, Miss Jenkins repeated, her voice rising in disbelief. She clutched the envelope protectively. That's ridiculous. We've already spoken to airport security. Captain Myers, standing a few feet away, crossed his arms and interjected. Security might have been fooled, but I wasn't. This kid was lingering, watching staff entrances. He could have been learning flight schedules or staff routines for who knows what purpose. I won't stand for that kind of risk. Officer Kingsley placed a hand on Myers' shoulder, trying to calm him down. Let us handle this, Captain. Then he turned to Andre. Son, I just need your cooperation. You've shown security your text messages, correct? Andre nodded, his mouth suddenly dry. Yes, sir. They said it was fine. Gomez piped in, her voice softening. Why don't we verify that with Miss Jenkins? And then we can all go our separate ways. Miss Jenkins frowned. He's telling the truth. I'm Miss Jenkins, Lena Jenkins. I work directly under she paused, catching herself before revealing the new ownership. Let's just say I'm in the executive level. Andre's mother is my boss. He came to pick up these documents. Look. She handed them a business card that bore the airline's logo and her name. Then she displayed the text messages from Andre's mother, instructing him to retrieve the envelope. Kingsley scanned them. Everything seems in order. Captain, it appears that there may have been a misunderstanding. Myers narrowed his eyes, refusing to back down. A misunderstanding? Why did he spend so much time near that secure door? He was studying us. Don't you want to do a deeper background check? Andre's anger flared at the accusation. I was looking at the planes, not your door. The tension thickened, and a small crowd of onlookers, other employees, a couple of flight attendants, even a maintenance worker began to gather. They sensed the confrontation's gravity, but also a certain confusion. A teenager and an assistant from the executive offices hardly seemed like criminals. Miss Jenkins opened her mouth to speak, but she was cut off by the sudden ringing of her phone. She glanced at the screen and her eyes widened. It's your mother, she whispered to Andre. She's arriving earlier than expected. Before Andre could respond, Captain Myers snorted in derision. Good. Maybe she can explain why her son is snooping around sensitive areas. Miss Jenkins glared at him, her patience worn thin. Watch your tone, she said, stepping forward. Andre's mother is a highly respected professional. The last thing she needs is this kind of nonsense. Officer Kingsley raised his hands. Let's de-escalate, folks. No one's under arrest, but we do need a proper statement. He turned to Miss Jenkins. Since you're in the executive offices, we'll just need a formal confirmation that Andre is authorized to be here. Myers huffed. That's not enough. Kingsley leveled a look at the pilot. Captain, With all due respect, this is a police matter now, and the young man hasn't been found doing anything illegal. The airline can handle any internal discipline if they wish, but there's no cause for an arrest or further police involvement unless new evidence arises. At that moment, the glass doors at the far end of the corridor swung open. Standing there, dressed in a crisp, tailored suit, was Naomi Westbrook, Andre's mother, the soon-to-be publicly announced new owner of Southern Skies Aviation. Her gaze swept the scene, her son surrounded by police officers, Miss Jenkins looking flustered, and the pilot seething with suspicion. In that split second, everyone felt the atmosphere shift, though none more so than Captain Myers when he realized who was walking toward them. Naomi Westbrook moved with an air of poised confidence, each step echoing on the polished floor. She was tall, with a commanding presence that seemed to part the onlookers without a word. People recognized authority when they saw it, though Myers had no inkling of just how much authority she truly wielded. Andre's face lit up with relief. "Mom," he exclaimed, stepping forward. "Mr." Jenkins offered a quick, grateful nod to her boss, then shot a glance at Myers, as if to say, "Now you've done it." Officer Kingsley turned, acknowledging Naomi with professional courtesy. "Ma'am, we're with the Atlanta Police Department. We were investigating a report. Is this your son?" "Yes," Naomi replied coolly, her gaze flickering to the pilot who stood nearby, arms stiff at his sides. "What seems to be the problem, officer?" Kingsley hesitated, clearly caught off guard by her calm self-assurance. "We received a complaint about suspicious activity. It appears to have been a misunderstanding, but we needed to verify everything properly. There's no immediate cause for further police involvement." Naomi nodded, absorbing the situation. Her expression remained neutral, but Andre could see the tension in her jaw. She turned her attention to Captain Myers. "I'm told you made the call to the authorities. I'd like to know why." Myers cleared his throat, feeling the weight of her stare. Something about this woman radiated power, and it left him unsettled. Still, he clung to the last remnants of his righteous indignation. "Your son was behaving suspiciously near a restricted area. I did what I thought was necessary to protect the airline and its employees. We've had memos emphasizing vigilance." Naomi regarded him for a moment before speaking in a measured tone. "I see. Well, thank you for your vigilance. However, I assure you my son is not a threat." She turned back to Kingsley and Gomez. "Officers, do you have everything you need?" Kingsley nodded. "Yes, ma'am. We'll file this as an unfounded report. No further action from our side." Relieved, Miss Jenkins let out a breath. Andre tried to catch his mother's eye, silently communicating how rattled he felt. She placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, then fixed her gaze once more on Captain Myers. "You'll hear from me soon," she said, her voice filled with a subtle but unmistakable promise of consequence. Myers frowned. "What does that mean?" Naomi offered a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We'll discuss it in my office, Captain." An uneasy murmur rippled through the employees gathered around. Her office? The pilot's confusion was visible. He wondered who she was. Clearly someone high up in the airline's hierarchy, but how high? Before he could probe further, Miss Jenkins took the lead. "Let's move to a more private setting." She guided Naomi, Andre, and the officers down the hall, leaving Myers to follow behind with mounting anxiety. As they walked, rumors flew among the bystanders. Some employees recognized Naomi immediately, having seen her at closed-door meetings or in glimpses with existing higher-ups. Others only knew that something monumental was happening. Behind the scenes, the final documents for the airline's acquisition were set to be signed. Naomi Westbrook would officially take the reins, a fact that, within the next half hour, Captain Myers was about to learn in the most shocking way possible. They arrived at a sleek boardroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac. The room was usually reserved for high-level meetings, adorned with a long mahogany table and leather swivel chairs. A large television screen on one wall displayed flight paths and weather updates, a running status of the airline's daily operations. Naomi Westbrook guided her son to a seat. Miss Jenkins exchanged a few words with the police officers, who confirmed they no longer needed to be involved. With a nod, they departed, leaving behind an uneasy silence. Captain Myers stood awkwardly near the door, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Although he was a man accustomed to giving orders in the cockpit, here he sensed he was out of his depth. Naomi's presence was more commanding than any corporate executive he'd encountered. Finally, Miss Jenkins broke the silence. "Captain Myers, allow me to formally introduce you to Miss Naomi Westbrook." She paused for effect. "She is our new majority owner and CEO of Southern Skies Aviation." Myers' face went ashen, shock swallowing his usual confidence. "What? But I thought the sale was still in negotiations." Naomi folded her arms. "It was kept under wraps. Our legal and financial teams finalized the deal yesterday. I came here today to tie up some administrative loose ends and to collect my son. He was doing me a small favor, but instead got treated like a criminal." Andre felt a sudden wave of validation as he watched the color drain from Myers' cheeks. Still, he couldn't help feeling a pang of sympathy. The pilot looked genuinely stunned. Myers struggled to compose himself. "Miss Westbrook, I didn't know. I was only following protocol. The memos said." Naomi lifted a hand, silencing him. "I'm aware of the memos. As I said before, I appreciate caution where our security is concerned. But it doesn't excuse profiling an innocent young man who did nothing more than admire airplanes." Myers clenched his jaw. "You can't accuse me of profiling. I'd have done the same if it was any other teenager." Her eyes narrowed, frustration finally surfacing in her usually calm demeanor. "This conversation isn't about what you would or wouldn't have done under different circumstances. It's about what you actually did. You bypassed standard procedures by calling the police after security had already cleared Andre. I need to understand why." A heavy silence blanketed the room. "Miss." Jenkins pulled out a file from her bag, placing it on the table. "We have documented statements from airport security and from Officer Kingsley. Based on their accounts, it appears you were insistent on escalating the matter, even when there was no legitimate cause. That kind of decision-making poses a liability risk to our airline." Myers swallowed hard. I'm sorry if I overreacted. But you must understand, I have an impeccable record. I take safety very seriously. I was only thinking of the airline." Naomi's voice softened just a fraction. "I believe that you believe you were acting in the airline's best interests. But your actions put my son through an unnecessary ordeal. What's more, you risked damaging this company's reputation by having law enforcement come in on a baseless claim. We'll be dealing with internal follow-ups to ensure this sort of incident doesn't happen again." Myers looked like he wanted to protest, but seemed unable to find the right words. The reality of standing before the new CEO, a powerful black woman, hit him full force, especially considering how quickly his assumptions had led him astray. He bowed his head slightly. "What happens now?" Naomi exchanged a glance with Miss Jenkins. "That depends on how you choose to move forward," she said carefully. "We can address it through additional training, a disciplinary review, or a chance for you to reflect and reset your approach. But understand this, Southern Skies Aviation, under my leadership, will not tolerate discrimination or reckless decision-making. The sooner you recognize that, the better for everyone." With that, Naomi signaled the meeting was over. Myers lingered a moment longer, defeat written across his face, before nodding and excusing himself. Behind him, Andre and Miss Jenkins watched quietly. Andre felt a rush of relief that his mother had taken control of the situation, but he also sensed that the day's drama was far from over. As soon as Captain Myers left the boardroom, rumors exploded through the corridors and terminals of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Word spread that the airline's mysterious new owner had arrived in person and that she'd just dealt with a racially charged conflict involving one of the airline's most senior pilots. Flight attendants whispered about it in the galley. Ground crew exchanged wary glances as they loaded luggage. Corporate staff typed furiously on chat apps, speculating on whether this incident would lead to lawsuits, public relations nightmares, or mass firings. A few employees felt relieved, hoping that Naomi Westbrook's leadership would usher in a more progressive, inclusive culture. Others, who had grown comfortable with the old guard, worried that they'd be next on the chopping block for any perceived transgression. Meanwhile, Captain Myers retreated to the pilot's lounge, where he was met with a flurry of inquisitive stares. He wasn't the type to confide in colleagues, but the day's events had rattled him more than he cared to admit. As he slumped onto a leather sofa, a junior pilot approached him hesitantly. "Hey, Captain," the younger man said quietly, "is it true that you got into it with the new CEO over some kid?" Myers shot him a harsh glare. "Watch your mouth. It wasn't some kid." He stopped, realizing he couldn't even articulate a valid reason for his suspicion anymore. The words died on his lips. Instead, he just muttered, "I was following protocol." The junior pilot nodded uncomfortably and backed away. Myers rubbed his forehead, knowing that his carefully built reputation was suddenly on shaky ground. He'd always been respected, even admired for his professionalism. Now whispers swirled that he was a bigot, or at least impulsive and prone to overreacting. Was his career at Southern Skies Aviation now in jeopardy? Elsewhere in the executive hallway, Naomi Westbrook and Miss Jenkins navigated a sea of employees who suddenly made way for them, offering subdued greetings and curious looks. Andre walked between them, feeling as if he'd stepped into a movie. He could sense that in one swift moment, his mother's identity had become public knowledge. The hush in the hall, the wide-eyed stares, everyone knew who she was now. Miss Jenkins gently laid a hand on Andre's shoulder. "You okay?" He gave a small nod. "Just processing," he admitted. The day had spiraled from excitement about visiting the airport to a full-blown confrontation with security, police, and a pilot. Naomi cast him a compassionate glance. "We'll talk more at home. Right now, I need to speak to the board. Some of them want an emergency meeting over this. They're concerned about potential liabilities." Andre frowned. "But you didn't do anything wrong," she sighed. "I know. But when you own a company, everything becomes your responsibility, good or bad. We need to reassure the board that we have a plan to address the systemic issues highlighted by this incident. It's not just about Captain Myers. It's about how the entire company deals with these issues going forward." Andre noticed the weight on his mother's shoulders, the gravity of carrying an airline through a scandal that could go public at any moment. Despite his own stress, he felt a surge of admiration for her. She was handling it all, protecting him, guiding the company, and fending off internal politics. "I'm ready to help however I can," he said, squaring his shoulders. Naomi gave him a grateful smile, and Miss Jenkins offered a supportive nod. They all knew the road ahead was fraught with challenges, but as a family and as a leadership team, they intended to face it head-on. That afternoon, Naomi Westbrook convened a hastily arranged meeting with the board of directors in the same boardroom where the incident had unfolded. The mood was tense, and the table was lined with stern faces. Some board members joined via video conference, their disapproving visages flickering on large screens. They had caught wind of the scuffle involving Andre, the new CEO, and a veteran pilot. Whispers had reached them that the police were involved. "We cannot let this blow up into a PR nightmare," one board member said bluntly from the far end of the table. An older man with silver hair and a perpetual frown, he represented a large block of shareholders. Perception is reality in the airline industry. We need damage control fast. Naomi nodded. She had anticipated this reaction. I agree, which is why we need to be transparent about what happened and outline the steps we'll take to prevent similar occurrences. Another board member chimed in via video conference, her face pixelated but her voice firm. This situation highlights a deeper issue. Have we allowed a culture of implicit bias among our staff? If so, how do we root that out? Naomi leaned forward. Yes, that's the real question. A single incident like this is often just the tip of the iceberg. We need comprehensive bias and sensitivity training, starting from the top pilots, management, everyone. We have to ensure no one else feels harassed or unfairly targeted, whether they're an employee, a passenger, or even my own child. Some board members nodded in agreement. Others looked wary, concerned about the potential cost and the optics of admitting any wrongdoing. Finally, the silver-haired board member spoke again. We trust your leadership, Miss Westbrook, but we must act swiftly. I propose we hold a formal inquiry into the matter, invite Captain Myers to explain his side, and see if further disciplinary action is warranted. Naomi met his gaze steadily. That's fair. I've already spoken with him privately. He'll be part of the inquiry, along with the security staff and the responding police officers, if necessary. A murmur of approval circulated around the table. Naomi outlined additional measures, a staff-wide memo announcing zero tolerance for discrimination, an updated code of conduct, and an anonymous reporting line for any future concerns. Though the board members still looked uneasy, they gradually softened as Naomi demonstrated she had a plan. Outside the boardroom, Andre waited with Miss Jenkins in a nearby lounge. They had used the quiet time to talk about how quickly the day's events had escalated and what it all meant for his mother's leadership. It seems so complicated, Andre said, glancing at the closed door. She has to balance public relations, internal politics, and still handle the daily operations. Miss Jenkins offered a gentle smile. She's done it before with her other companies, but an airline is a different beast, especially one with a legacy culture. There will be turbulence. Andre let out a slow breath. It's wild how one moment I'm just looking at planes, and the next, my mum's dealing with a potential scandal. Such is life at the top, Miss Jenkins replied, her eyes on the boardroom door. But she's not alone. She has you, me, and a team of good people to help navigate. A moment later, the door opened and the board members filed out, their expressions thoughtful and subdued. Naomi emerged last, looking exhausted but resolute. She locked eyes with Andre, giving him a brief nod that conveyed both reassurance and a grim determination. The message was clear. They were in this together, and they would see it through no matter what. In the days that followed, the airline initiated its inquiry. Testimonies were gathered from Andre, Miss Jenkins, security personnel, the police officers, and, most crucially, Captain Myers. The pilot sat nervously through his interview, struggling to defend his decision to call the police, despite airport security having already cleared Andre. The more he spoke, the more it became clear his actions were driven less by concrete facts and more by unexamined biases. The inquiry committee, consisting of senior board members and human resources representatives, submitted their findings to Naomi in a confidential report. They concluded that while Myers acted without malicious intent, his decision was grossly disproportionate and fueled by assumptions. The official recommendation, mandatory bias training, a suspension without pay for 2 weeks, and a final warning on his record. If another incident of racial profiling or excessive escalation occurred, he would be subject to immediate termination. When Naomi informed Myers of the decision, his face registered shock and anger, but also a grudging acceptance. His once unblemished record was now tainted. The pilot who prided himself on near-perfect performance had been humbled in a way he never anticipated. Hard karma, some whispered. Others simply saw it as corporate accountability, a sign that the new CEO meant business when it came to reform. Meanwhile, Naomi and Andre received mixed reactions from the public once the story leaked through social media. Some praised the new CEO for protecting her son and setting a strong precedent against discrimination. Others accused her of wielding her power unfairly to punish a pilot who made a mistake. Some even suggested that Andre was given special treatment solely because of his mother's position. But Naomi stood her ground. "I stand for fair treatment of everyone," she said at a press conference. "That includes my own son and our employees. If we don't hold ourselves accountable, then who will?" Thanks to proactive PR strategies, Naomi's decisive action came across mostly positively, especially within the airline. Employees felt more secure, knowing that leadership was serious about equitable treatment. Internal morale showed signs of improvement, particularly among minority staff who had long felt sidelined. Andre, for his part, felt a whirlwind of relief and discomfort. He hadn't intended to become a symbol of corporate change. But as his mother explained, sometimes life thrusts people into roles they never asked for. He continued to visit the airport, albeit more discreetly, fostering his love of aviation in a new mentorship program Naomi had set up for interested youth. One afternoon, nearly a month after the incident, Andre walked through the terminal with a fresh perspective. Gone was the naive excitement, replaced by a nuanced understanding of how power, privilege, and prejudice could collide in unexpected places. Yet he also felt hope. He could see that positive changes were brewing under his mother's leadership. New diversity initiatives, open forums where staff could voice concerns, and revised security protocols that emphasized reasoned judgment over knee-jerk suspicion. As he watched a plane take off, its engines roaring in a triumphant ascent, Andre smiled to himself. He pictured a future where he might one day pilot such a plane or even develop new aviation technologies. The sky was the limit, and he had a front-row seat to the transformation of an airline that would hopefully usher in a fairer era for employees and passengers alike. Captain Myers, meanwhile, serving his suspension at home, was forced to confront his actions. Hard karma had indeed come calling, and whether it would lead him to genuine self-reflection or hardened resentment remained uncertain. But one thing was clear: the days of unquestioned power in the cockpit had flown off into the horizon, replaced by a new reality in which accountability and respect for all were non-negotiable. Sometimes the simplest actions, like a teenager gazing at airplanes, can spark the biggest changes. In this story, the tension of racial bias collided with corporate power to expose hidden prejudices. Captain Myers learned that rank and experience don't shield anyone from the consequences of reckless choices. Meanwhile, Andre and his mother, Naomi Westbrook, emerged stronger, igniting a cultural shift at Southern Skies Aviation that promises fairness and respect for all. If you found yourself hooked by this tale of power, prejudice, and redemption, we invite you to join our journey. Like this video, share it with those who appreciate stories of real-life lessons, and subscribe for more content that challenges perspectives. When we shine a spotlight on everyday injustices, we open the door to change. And as this story shows, doing what's right often starts with a single courageous step.